Hi, this is Catherine, and welcome to the Feeding Hour. In this episode, Abby and I talk about our journeys to infant feeding and lactation. Throughout the episode, Abby is holding her 6-month-old Remy. About halfway through the episode, Remy is showing signs of sleepiness. We take a brief break while Abby rocks Remy to sleep. Thanks for your patience as Abby lives out the principles of attachment parenting live on the podcast. We hope you enjoy. Hey, Abby.
Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, very good.
Good. Well, the whole kind of purpose of our podcast is to share knowledge and also invite mothers and feeding professionals on to share their stories. So I thought today we might share our stories because if we're going to ask people to be vulnerable, we got to be vulnerable ourselves. So,
I love that. Well, let me start you off with a question today.
okay.
So tell me just kind of about your journey to this point. What got you interested in becoming an SLP and particularly specializing in infant feeding, and just anything else you want to share about your life story?
Okay. Well, I think that when I decided to be an SLP
Mhm.
in undergraduate, I really wanted to choose a yes, ma'am. I wanted to choose a profession that was sustainable for motherhood, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, I knew that I wanted to do some type of helping profession, and speech language pathology sort of was an avenue from what I heard into that.
Mhm.
And then after undergraduate, I actually met some SLPs actually in undergraduate that
Mm.
hated their jobs. And I was a senior in college and was applying to graduate schools, and I met them at a football game, and I was
Mhm.
like, interesting.
Hmm.
So I, among other reasons, I took some time between undergraduate and graduate school. So I
Mhm.
did a bunch of stuff. I worked with my mother.
Aw, nice.
I did like a service year. I worked as a teacher. I and in that process of working as a teacher, I was actually living in Northern Idaho.
Wow.
And I met these incredible families, just an incredible community of mothers in particular that stood out to me in their bond with their children.
Mhm.
And it was something that I hadn't quite seen before, in that, they genuinely, um, to know, well, it was just a bond that I'd never quite seen before. And I was
Yeah.
really inspired by it.
Oh,
Um,
I love to hear
yeah,
about this. It's so
yeah.
interesting. What
And
what stuck out to you about like how they were bonded with their children?
mm, they weren't insecure about their motherhood.
Mm.
They didn't apologize for making decisions for their children.
That's
Um,
so cool. That's like striking a chord right now because I feel like I've been like, you know, sometimes I get in my perfectionism about even recording this podcast. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't do it when I have Remy with me and stuff.
right,
But I'm like,
right.
okay, that's the life of having a 6-month-old. Like, I shouldn't be like trying to separate my professional life and motherhood so much that I
Yes.
mean, of course, there's room for professionalism, but sometimes I'm like, that's what this is about.
Right,
We can
right.
make it
Like
work.
Remy is a part of you.
Yes,
Um,
she is. We are still conjoined, I feel like, until
yes.
at least 9 months, right?
Yeah, yeah, and on.
Yes.
So that was kind of just my
I love that.
spark to really look into feeding. So I
I love that.
worked as what's called a feeding technician at
Mhm.
Children's Healthcare of Atlanta,
Nice.
because I wanted to move back south. And it was there that I kind of was like, this is really beautiful.
Yeah.
Because there I saw these mothers who were really desperate to feed their children.
Yeah.
And didn't, I asked the SLP there. I was like, well, what about cue-based? Like, don't we want to focus on cue-based feeding? And she was like, at this point, these children's cues are broken. Like, they're
Yeah.
past the point of
Because
cueing.
they've been having so many feeding issues for so long.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And the
Hmm.
desperation of these mothers, and then being able to see them empowered by coaching them in feeding their own child, I was just
Wow.
like, this is beautiful. And I feel privileged to be a part of this bond.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so there's just this like through line in
yeah.
motherhood, feeding, and the bond between a mother and a child that is created by feeding.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so then I went to graduate school and I knew that um, I wanted to continue pediatric feeding. I had a 10 out of 10 swallowing professor in
Oh,
graduate school, and she opened up a door for me to work have an internship in the NICU, where I'm at now. So
amazing.
that's my story. And then we met.
Oh,
Yeah, I knew that I wanted to move into pediatric feeding, but I didn't know any SLPs that currently did it as a private practice, or
mhm.
especially with the lactation piece. I didn't know anything about the lactation piece. So I found you, and bada bing, bada boom, here
Here
we
we are.
are. So that's my story in a nutshell.
I love
Um,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, I
Well,
love hearing that. I
yeah,
love like just everything that brought you to this point and like how, yeah, like you said, like just all your different experiences have given you such a interesting lens, even with, you know, not becoming a mother yet. I feel like you have
yes,
such an understanding of like how, um, just how motherhood and feeding is a part of it, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. It's
Excuse
like
me, I'm
real
walking.
life. It's real life.
Real
Like,
life.
this is real life. This is
Here we are.
motherhood, in the raw.
Yes, in the raw.
Yeah, right. I'd love to hear about your story.
Yes.
Yeah, like
Well,
how you got into speech language pathology, and then how that kind of meandered to feeding and lactation.
yeah. So, um, similarly, I was interested in like a helping profession and I learned about speech pathology and I really didn't know what I would do with it. I just remember really wanting to figure out what I would do and in undergraduate school and I figured out um pretty quickly that I liked all my speech pathology classes and I did an internship in grad school um, at GW. We could have a hospital placement, and so I did it at a hospital in Washington, D.C., and I loved the medical setting like so much more than I thought I would. And so that started me on this kind of medical side of things. Um, and so then I kind of like you, I had heard of pediatric feeding and I had another internship placement and I seeked out a mentor and was like, I have to get this internship. Like I just know I was like, it was at Georgetown University Hospital. And I was like, I have to be in the NICU. I have to see what this is about. And I just had a hunch I was going to love it. And so I they hadn't taken an intern from our school in a while and I somehow got them to interview me and take me and it was a really intense internship. It was like 5 days a week, like long hours and I just like loved it and I was like I can't believe that your job as an SLP could be like feeding
Mm,
premature babies all day.
yeah.
Um and so I learned so much from my mentors there. And I
Alrighty. So we just took a little Remy recess. We love
Remy
it.
intermission via Remy.
Yes, absolutely. But you were telling us about your internship at GW and how you loved it so much when you
Yes.
were working with infants?
Yes. Yeah, so I loved the NICU and I kind of realized, okay, to get here, I need to gain some perspective and experience in the field. So my mentors were encouraging me to do early intervention, which is where
Mm.
you go into the homes and work with babies ages 0 through 3 on mainly language, but also feeding. And I worked at a private practice also during my fellowship year that did early intervention in the home, but also had a private practice setting. And I kind of became like the feeding person there. So even though I was fresh out of school, I still I had a lot of coursework and experience, and I also talked or was mentored by the person there on feeding. And so I just really took on all the feeding cases. And so that gave me a lot of valuable experience with like different diagnoses, like sounds more similar to what you talked about at CHOA, more complex cases. And then in the homes, it was a lot of language, but also some feeding stuff. But it usually for early intervention, I felt like it was like ages 1 and 2, not as much the infants
Yeah.
that we were getting consulted. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was really good experience. And then in Chicago, I ended up doing more special care nurseries and adult swallowing. So throughout this time, I also, yeah, I always just kept working in adult dysphagia. So that gave me a lot of good hospital experience and just understanding the different levels of care and how to help families in at different stages of acuity, I feel like.
And
Um, mhm.
and how did motherhood change your feeding journey, your life? I'd love to hear about
Yes,
motherhood
yes.
specifically.
So that was a big turning point, I would say. In Chicago, I gave birth to my son, and he was born prematurely at 35 weeks. And so that kind of brought the full circle moment home of like working in a NICU before, but then now being the mom of a NICU baby. And he was in there for 3 weeks working on feeding. So I knew a little too much, I would say, to be a NICU mom. But, it also was helpful that I kind of understood what to expect and could help him along the way, figure out breastfeeding and figure out bottle feeding, even getting off the tube. Um, and then I kind of really delved into lactation at that point because I worked so hard to get my own feeding journey figured out. And maybe that's a story for another day, but basically Jacques had, a tongue tie, and then with the
Mm.
prematurity, it was just really hard for him to transfer milk at the breast. But I was really determined to still pump and work on breastfeeding. So I ended up triple feeding for way too long. And
Triple feeding. Can you
yeah,
elucidate
yes.
our audience on
It's
triple feeding?
basically like when you are breastfeeding, but the baby isn't taking enough to gain the appropriate weight. So you're told that you have to supplement, but if you supplement, then you need to pump in order to keep your body making that milk.
Mm.
So if you just were to supplement with formula, then your body would not make a full milk supply. So I decided that I still wanted to pump. And so, as you can imagine, that's very time consuming to breastfeed, then bottle feed the baby, then pump every single time that they have to feed.
Mm.
So, as a lactation consultant now, I have a few creative ideas of how I work with parents on that,
Yeah.
so that it's not so time consuming and draining and bad for your mental health. But
Yeah.
like one of the things I always say now is just like never do that at night. Like at night for the two
Mm.
free night feedings, just like pump and bottle and then work on the 5 breastfeeds during the day. You can work on latching. But like when latching isn't going well or isn't efficient, then there's no point in doing that when everyone's exhausted.
Yeah.
But I unfortunately did not have that advice at the time, and I thought I needed to practice all the time. Um,
Mm.
so, anyways, um, I yeah, and my experience with just trying to find support was so challenging that that's one of the reasons that I wanted to become an IBCLC because I had already had it in the back of my mind, maybe I would do that, but, um, I just felt like having the SLP perspective for like the oral function and the tongue tie and everything, and then having the that could just really help as an IBCLC, because I thought a lot of the IBCLCs I met just like didn't know how to help me, honestly. Like
Yeah.
they were trying to help me, but I was very stuck in with this baby that just really couldn't effectively breastfeed for a long time. So it's just like for a long, if it's going to last like 2 or 3 months to figure it out, people, I mean, really don't have the support or time off work even, or like
Yeah.
just it was just hard to mentally do it for that long without seeing the results. Um, but I'm really glad I did, because we did end up breastfeeding for 18 months, and it really led me to the rest of my career, I feel like, because I did the TOTS course, tethered oral tissues training, with Autumn Henning shortly after that. And then I found my mentor for lactation, Jane O'Connor, and I started doing all of my lactation hours, and I ended up becoming an IBCLC like 2 years later. So during that time, I also, when he was one, got a job at a specialty clinic in Chicago that also taught me a lot about tongue ties, because that's where I started working with adults with oral function issues in the outpatient setting. And yeah, I just really delved into this whole oral function, airway health, what we were talking about in the last episode,
Yeah.
um, that space. So it's really been a meandering road, but I feel like now as an IBCLC, I'm just able to really reach more patients. I really did it so I could take insurance more easily with my private practice. And I just love being able to help parents from that lens,
Yeah. Yeah, I
and yeah,
guess.
help them connect with their kids.
Yeah. So as a follow-up, if you
Mhm.
had to choose, this is gonna be a
Yes.
tough question, between like uh infant feeding from the infant side, like stuff you
Oh.
learned in the NICU,
Mhm.
breastfeeding, or like the myofascial stuff, if you had to work in one like sector,
Oh
what?
my gosh. Well, I kind of love that I've been able to figure out a way to do all three.
Yes, you don't
I'll
have to
say, like right
choose.
now, I've kind of just been doing all three. Like I
Uh,
do the in-home visits with lactation through the Lactation Network, and then I'm actually working at CHOA as a per diem lactation consultant. So just with more medically complex babies or NICU babies, but from the lactation lens. And then I still work as an SLP for my private practice out of Chicago. I do telehealth with adult um, myofunctional therapy cases, or swallowing therapy, like even working on like their breathing and speech, any kind of oral motor issues, but with adults.
did
So yeah. Mhm.
did you see in your feeding journey with both of your children? And I feel like we could probably have a whole episode just on that. But um, did you see, we talk about attachment feeding
Mhm.
and attachment parenting. Did you see that in your, it's kind of a leading question, but did you see that in your feeding journey? And what was that like for you in our last couple minutes?
Yeah, I think I definitely saw that when there were issues with feeding. I mean, I had a lot of anxiety in general, just about the whole NICU experience and coming home from the NICU and weight gain. But I do think that when there were issues going on with feeding, it really impacted my attachment with my baby. I mean, not always in like, not, I don't know. It was just like this intensity that I just really needed to feed him. And so if anything, it made my attachment to him even like stronger in a weird way. Like it was like I never wanted to leave him. I was really nervous to give bottles because I was so afraid it would detriment, like hurt the breastfeeding relationship. Like I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there, but I do think if when feeding is not going well, I think it affects the whole family, honestly. Like even I see it with my friends with like toddler feeding issues. Like I think it's just a stressful thing to not be going well. And then with my daughter, it was just so much easier because she was full term and she was just, it was so much easier to breastfeed. Like, I think I knew a lot more, obviously, having done it before. And even if we had little hiccups that came up, it was just, she was always gaining weight fine. So I didn't have this like worry associated with it. So I think, I think there's definitely, it's really important to figure out it builds your confidence as a mom, I think, to figure out feeding and however you end up figuring it out, just finding a plan that you feel good about, I think builds your confidence that like I can take care of this baby.
Yeah, getting resources and reaching
Yeah.
out. Well,
Yeah.
and it's such a primal
Yeah.
like need to feed your own child that when that is disrupted or you feel it's taken from you or something, then it's almost like instinctual. Like it's like an instinct injury. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're like, this thing that I feel born to do, I am unable to or cannot
Totally.
meet this need of my child
Yes.
for some reason. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so I can imagine how
Yeah.
challenging that would be just
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, and as a family, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And to go back to your question about which one I would like the most if I could choose, I feel like that is why I do love still working in like the NICU setting or in the hospital setting, because I feel like really called to help parents figure out that piece of it when there is something going wrong. Um, but I would say like from a practical standpoint, like I do love, getting to go into people's houses and help moms that are like not in the thick of it of that they're able to learn in the comfort of their home and all of that. But I don't know, it is cool just seeing it from different perspectives, um and being able to help in different ways along the journey.
that is beautiful. You're able to like play this different role in
Yeah.
all of these different settings,
Hmm.
but with like an underlying mission that's
Yes.
consistent. Yeah.
Yes, exactly,
Well,
exactly.
awesome.
Well,
Well,
this is so fun
yeah,
getting
thanks
to
so much
talk
for
about
sharing your
our
story.
talk about our origin stories of why we kind of did this, and or how we got where we are. And then wanting to make this podcast, we realized that we were having all these conversations and we were like, we should, like, this could help some parents. And we also want to hear other people's stories, because
Yes.
I feel like there's so much just lack of understanding, or just lack of I don't know, shame around it or whatever, about how do you make breastfeeding work, or if it doesn't work, how do you make formula feeding work, or just, I know I want to breastfeed, but I don't know how that's going to go. I just think if people talked about it more or heard different stories more, then maybe it would be easier when you start out breastfeeding. Like, I felt
Definitely.
like that about birth. Like, when I heard a
Mm,
lot of birth stories, I felt like, okay, now even though something is going not according to plan, I feel like, okay, at least I know what I've heard of this before, and I've heard of what this is or what can happen. So
right. It's not
maybe
a
this would
foreign
help
language to
with
me
all the,
completely.
maybe this would
Yeah.
help with like breastfeeding, when all of a sudden you're getting all these clogged ducts, or you're having
Yeah.
a tongue tie, or at least you've heard these terms before and you're not just like, this is a foreign
What's
language.
going on?
Yeah.
Overwhelming. Yeah. Along with like hormonal postpartum stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Abby, thank you so much for sharing your story and for asking me about mine.
My gosh, thank you for sharing your story. I love I love seeing how you got into this work too.
Yeah, I think it's going to be such a great time and space to invite others on to
Mhm.
share their story and to hear what they have to say about it too. So,
Yes.
looking forward to more
Looking forward to many
episodes.
feeding hours.
Yes. Alrighty, Abby, well, I'll let you go, but have a great night.
Okay, you too. Bye. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you are interested in learning more about attachment feeding or have any feedback for us at all, please email us at thefeedinghourpodcast@gmail.com. You You can also sign up for our email list in the link in the show notes to be the first to know when a new episode is released. See you next time, and happy feeding.